Kirk Cousins signed a 4-year contract with the Falcons, but how long is it really for?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So, guys, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. and I've been covering the Falcons for far too long, guys. Formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I appreciate each and every one of you that have been following me all these years that I've been covering this godforsaken football team. And I appreciate all the everydayers that make this humble podcast their first listen, right? And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. But as godforsaken as the Atlanta Falcons have been, it is a brand new era. It is the Kirk Cousins era. Kirko chains, Kirko bangs, whatever you want to call him. But we'll be talking about his contract on today's episode. Later in the episode, we'll be talking about the new Parker Hesse and Charlie Woerner, the other free agent that signed with the Falcons on Monday, in addition to Kirk Cousins. And of course, we'll talk about the one free agent the Falcons lost on Monday, and Jeff OKudah, and sort of what is remaining on that pass rush market where we hope the Falcons can really address. So let's try to piece together the details of Kirk Cousins' contract. We don't have all the full details. We got some snippets here or there. I'm sure by the time many of you are listening to this, you might have heard the full details. But what we know is he signed a 4-year, $180 million contract. $100 million of that is guaranteed across the first 3 years, $90 million of that coming in the first 2 years guaranteed. Half of that $100 million in guaranteed money comes in the form of a signing bonus of $50 million. Now, we can assume that the other $40 million in guaranteed money is made up mostly of base salaries in these first 2 years in 2024 and 2025. And, we can guess that based off of, again, some of these details, we can guess that this is a 4-year contract that really breaks down to a 3-year contract for the Falcons once the guaranteed money runs out, right? Now, the Falcons might be able to move on from Kirk Cousins after 2 years, so move on from Kirk Cousins in 2026. But given that it's likely that 2026 year is going to require them to have to eat a large portion of dead money if they do move on from Kirk Cousins, that's why I think it's likely to turn into a 3-year contract. Now, we can guesstimate what that dead money could look like, right? If, the $50 million signing bonus is spread out over 4 years, that will mean after 2 years, there will still be $25 million in unpaid signing bonus after the 2025 season, which will then accelerate should the Falcons move off of Kirk Cousins to that salary cap as dead money. So about $25 million. You factor in the $10 million in guarantees that he's also due in 2026, add on to the top of that $25 million in unpaid signing bonus. That would mean that Kirk Cousins is going to have a dead money hit should the Falcons cut him in 2026, before the 2026 season, of at least $35 million. Now, one way that the Falcons could help lower their salary cap costs up front, but they would pay for this in the long term, is instead of spreading out that $50 million bonus over 4 years, the life of the contract, adding a 5th voidable year to that and spreading that out. And so then if that was the case, you would have $30 million of unpaid signing bonus coming after the first 2 years of the contract. And therefore your dead money hit in 2026, if you moved on from Kirk Cousins, would be about $40 million. So, cutting him in 2026 with a $35 or $40 million dead money hit is doable, especially if his original cap hit on the contract is higher than that. And I'm sitting here guessing again, without knowing all the knowledge, but guessing that his cap hit in 2026 is going to be like 45, 50, somewhere in that range type of money. So the Falcons could save, a few $1 million here or there, $5 or $10 million by cutting Kirk Cousins in 2026. They would save even more money if they made him a post-June 1 cut, but we'll worry about that later. So a lot depends on sort of, this is the big concern that a lot of folks have with is like, okay, Kirk Cousins, you're committing to him for a couple of years, but do you want to be as committed to Kirk Cousins long-term as you would want, given his age and whatnot. And so people are wondering, when is this off-ramp where the Falcons could move past Kirk Cousins? And I think it's probably 2027 after 3 seasons, but there is the possibility, depending on the structure of the contract, that it could happen in 2026. But obviously, everybody's worried about the off-ramp. But in the meantime, the focus on the Falcons is going to be winning games. And if they win games and Kirk is playing well, then, they're not going to necessarily be looking to sort of jump ship on that point. Now, the other issue that could complicate this is if the Falcons at some point in the next 2 years, very likely next season, wind up restructuring Kirk Cousins' contract, right? That we can guess that because there's about $40 million in base salaries due in the first 2 years, there's a decent chance that we get a $10 million base salary this year, a $30 million base salary next year. It could be as low as $2 million this year and $38 million next year. But the lower that base salary winds up being, the higher that cap hit and that base salary is going to wind up being in year 2, which is going to increase the chances that the Falcons have to restructure. So it's sort of a catch-22 with this, right? If you lower that base salary, you're going to lower the cap hit, and that's going to allow the Falcons to do all the spending that everybody's wanting them to do in spite of signing Kirk Cousins. And if, let's say, if that base salary is $2 million, then potentially, depending on how many years they're spreading out the signing bonus, you could see Kirk Cousins having as low a cap hit this upcoming season in 2024 as like $12 million or $14 million or something like that. But that would mean that, he would have a cap hit, somewhere in the $50 million range in 2025. And so it's very unlikely that the Falcons would keep him at that number and he would play under that number next season. And so they would likely restructure it by lowering that base salary of $38 million in this hypothetical situation and converting into bonus. And what that winds up doing is it winds up pushing more dead money into future years. So if in the event that the Falcons try to move off of Kirk Cousins after 2 years, after 3 years, it's going to be even harder to do that. That's what happened with the Matt Ryan contract when they kept restructuring. So that is going to be the issue with Kirk Cousins, depending on how they structure this contract. And it seems like very likely that whatever that year 2 base salary is going to be, it's going to be very high, which is going to, potentially compel the Falcons to restructure that next year. And again, that's only going to make it even harder to move off of Kirk Cousins in that year 3 in 2026. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how the full contract details go. I'm sure they will get revealed in the next day or so. Maybe by the time many of you are listening, we have the details on that. But I'm sitting here saying that in terms of, if you're the type of person that's very worried about the long-term viability of Kirk Cousins here in Atlanta, the Falcons are tied to Kirk Cousins definitely for 2 years, probably 3 years as well. So, I know that's a big fear for many of you guys, given the potential that Kirk Cousins suffers a decline, given that he's going to be 36, 37, 38, and 39 over the course of this 4-year contract. And you're worried about what happens if we're paying this huge amount of money to Kirk Cousins, 40, 50, possibly even $60 million cap hits to him. And we get middling quarterback play, which is the same conversation we had a couple of years ago with Matt Ryan, which is why the Falcons moved off of Matt Ryan, not because Matt Ryan was a bad quarterback, but you were getting kind of league average quarterback play and you were paying him like he was a top 5 quarterback in the league, and those things didn't match. We use the common phrase, why pay for cable if you're not watching cable? So you need to become a cord cutter. And I know that's a big fear for a lot of folks, but as I mentioned on the previous episode, if you missed that episode that aired Monday afternoon shortly after the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins, I do think that the Falcons, at least compared to Matt Ryan's time last year here in Atlanta when we had that major discussion, the Falcons are better insulated in 2024 than they were in 2021 to basically mitigate quote unquote middling quarterback play, right? That with their much improved run game, with hopefully better weapons, right? Again, hopefully they're going to add to the wide receiver room quite a bit this offseason so that it's not just Kyle Pitts and Drake London carrying the passing attack, as well as a much improved defense that you have in 2024 compared to what you had in 2021. I think you can sort of navigate middling quarterback play and still be a winning football team in 2024 if Kirk Cousins is just okay this year. And again, I think that's the worst case. Like, Kirk Cousins has never been a bad quarterback. At worst, he's been a average quarterback. And I know a lot of people are worried about, what happens with the Achilles. But again, I think, the worst case scenario is Kirk Cousins is doing a USO tour and he gets kidnapped by Somali pirates. But, I think in the realm of football worst case scenarios, I think you're probably going to get, the 17th best quarterback in the NFL this year, which is an upgrade over what the Falcons have had the last couple of years, even going back to Matt Ryan's last year. So we'll see how that all plays out. We'll get the details on that. But, in speaking of an improved run game, the Falcons run game got a lot better on Monday because they signed Charlie Woerner, the other free agent, in addition to Kirk Cousins. And secretly, guys, I let you in on a secret. The real reason I'm optimistic about the future of the team is because the Falcons now have a really good blocking tight end, and we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel is going to let you bet on every game of this year's NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on the big upset, the 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it on. If you want to take that 12 seed to upset the 5 seed, and I know you do, we all do. We all see it coming every single year. We're going to bet that money on the 12 seed. FanDuel is the place to go, whether you're betting on the NCAA tournament, Major League Baseball's upcoming, right? NFL draft is upcoming, right? NHL season, NBA season, it's all available at FanDuel.com/lockedon, and go there so that you can bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I want to plug the 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, the first of its kind, Locked On Sports Today, available not only on YouTube, but also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Check it out. And if you're looking for more local flair, Locked On Sports Today, of course, is giving you all the biggest stories, biggest national headlines from all the Locked On insiders. But if you're looking for more local flavor here on Locked On, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well. So let's talk about blocking tight ends. And if you are an everydayer of this podcast, you know this has been my favorite subject for the past, 6 months, right? Blocking tight ends. Ever since that last week of August when the Falcons cut Parker Hesse, it has been at the forefront of my mind. And the Falcons just found their superb blocking tight end, arguably the best blocking tight end in the entire NFL. If you look at the PFF grades, signing former 49ers tight end Charlie Woerner to a 3-year, $12 million contract. Now, we talked about the Falcons' need to replace Jonnu Smith with more formidable blocker, right? Everybody's talking about, the Falcons in adopting this Rams offense under Zach Robinson is going to be heavy 11 personnel. And we said, nope, they're going to still be a healthy amount of 12 personnel just because Kyle Pitts isn't really bringing it as a blocker. And we know that this team is going to be committed to running the football. The Rams were under Sean McVay. And we talked about it when they retained guys like offensive line coach Dwayne Ledford and running backs coach Michael Petrie, that they're basically taking the approach of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we talk about with Kirk Woerner, not Kurt Warner. How could I confuse Kirk Cousins with a Hall of Fame 2-time MVP quarterback like Kurt Warner? Of course, it's not as if Kirk Cousins is going to win a 2-time MVP and do it at age 37 and 38 like Aaron Rodgers. And meanwhile, the Falcons draft Jordan. I'm sorry, I'm going off the deep end, guys. Fantasizing about that. That's what Charlie Woerner, as addition to the roster, winds up doing for me. But talking about Kirk Cousins, you want to have a reliable ground game for him as well. So the Falcons are absolutely going to be committed to the run game. Charlie Woerner is a step in that. Not only is he a good blocker, he was the number 2 highest graded blocking tight end in the NFL last year, according to PFF. Number 1 was George Kittle. So technically, as far as blocking tight ends in the NFL, he was the best in the league, right? George Kittle's obviously a every down, full-time, all-world tight end. But in terms of guys that are purely there for blocking, Charlie Woerner was that guy. He was top 5 in zone blocking grade. He was top 6 in gap blocking grade. So regardless of the run scheme that the Falcons going to employ, he fits it. Obviously, this coaching staff from LA saw Charlie Woerner doing a great job sealing those edges with the 49ers. Now, the knock on Charlie Woerner is he doesn't contribute on offense, right? He only has 11 catches across 4 seasons. Now, maybe he doubles that number, his career NFL totals in terms of catches alone this year, right? Which, we've talked about in the past where like these number 2 blocking tight ends, typically, they're only going to catch maybe 10, 15 passes. That's what Levine Toilolo did. That's what we were projecting John Fitzpatrick to do. That's what we saw Michael Pruitt do these last couple of years, Parker Hesse as well. So, Charlie Woerner's not going to be a big factor in the pass game. Now, he is a good athlete, right? One of the reasons why the 49ers coveted him, right? So I think the Falcons will get more as a pass catcher out of him than the 3 or 4 catches he have given the 49ers the last couple of years, but it's probably not going to be super much more, but they can get more out of him. He can also do Parker Hesse like things because he does have that versatility. He hasn't done a lot of it in the NFL, but he did quite a bit of it in college at Georgia. Of course, that's the other thing I should mention. It is a homecoming for Charlie Woerner, given his time at Georgia. And we talked about this when the Falcons drafted John Fitzpatrick a couple of years ago, how Georgia was slowly becoming tight end U with guys like Charlie Woerner, Isaac Nada, John Fitzpatrick, Darnell Washington, Brock Bowers coming up in this year's draft. And there was a long time in the early 2000s where Georgia was also tight end U with Randy McMichael and Ben Watson and all those guys. So it does seem to reverting, although it's probably more blockers today than it was then when they were more pass catchers. But, I think Charlie Woerner can kind of be that sort of hybrid HY tight end that can really impact in the run game and be that point of attack guy. And what he doesn't necessarily contribute on offense as a pass catcher, he can more than make up on special teams. He was second in the NFL in special teams tackle. He led the 49ers in special teams tackles as a 4-core special teamers, meaning that he's out there on, all the special teams, the coverage units, the block units, the return units, all that stuff. So he's going to add a lot of value. So clearly, we're big fans of Charlie Woerner here on this podcast. We're big fans of any competent blocking tight end. We've talked before how that matters, especially in this outside zone blocking scheme when you're going to run to the outside. And we know that the Falcons are going to lean on that. Maybe they don't lean on it as much as Arthur Smith did, but it's absolutely going to be something that they do in their new offense with the retention of guys like Dwayne Ledford, the offensive line coach, who specializes in that outside zone run blocking scheme. And of course, Dwayne Ledford's also been elevated to being the run game coordinator. So he's going to be the guy that's basically say, let's just keep running this outside zone. And you need that sort of front side blocker to sort of see those edges on the end in order to operate that outside zone scheme. And we talked a lot over the last 6 months about how that was kind of a major reason why the Falcons run game was not as effective in 2023 as it was in 2022. The Parker Hesse agenda is still thriving. The Charlie Woerner agenda is only beginning. So we're just transforming that Parker Hesse agenda into the Charlie Woerner agenda. So I'm sure there will be plenty more conversations about Charlie Woerner over the next 6 months and how he's going to be the secret impact player for the Falcons. The only real downside on Charlie Woerner, because he's not as impactful a pass catcher, it kind of tips your hand when he comes in on the field, what the Falcons are going to do. They're going to overwhelmingly run. I think like 70% of his college snaps were blocks, he was asked to block. 75% of his NFL snaps, he's been basically asked to block. And so, it does kind of tip your hand a little bit. It's like, okay, when Charlie Woerner's on the field, it's either going to be a run play or it's going to be a play action pass. Now, of course, try to stop it. Like the 49ers clearly were tipping their hand for the last 3 years when Charlie Woerner was their number 2 tight end after George Kittle. It didn't really slow down their offense. So, not going to say that it's going to make or break the Falcons offense, but that is probably the only downside to Charlie Woerner not being sort of that dual threat blocker and receiver. But he's certainly going to add something to the offense. The Falcons lost a little bit on the defense, losing Jeff OKudah to the Houston Texans. We'll talk about that, as well as if the Falcons can make up for that, deficiency in the secondary by enhancing their pass rush, and whether or not the pass rushing market is starting to dry up. And we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. And I know for me, if I had more time, I'd be sitting here grinding Charlie Woerner film. But if you had more time, what would you do? Right? A better way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. That's why therapy can help you finding what matters most to you so that you can do more of it. Therapy has benefited me. BetterHelp has benefited me, teaching me coping skills like you can only control what you can control. You can't control whether or not the Falcons play Parker Hesse, right? But you can find ways to deal with it. And if you're looking for ways to cope, if you're looking to find what's important to you, and you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So we are wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons. And tomorrow, of course, your first listen will be more reacting to, more potential moves, cuts, whatever the Falcons wind up doing. That's what, this is what this week is all about. We play it by ear. We figure it out. For those of you that usually watch the show at 7 p.m. Eastern time when it premieres on YouTube, I'm going to let you know that probably like it is Monday night if you're watching on YouTube, that those episodes are going to probably go up a little bit later, probably closer to 9 or 10 o'clock, just because we just want to wait for all the news to happen. Maybe we'll miss some late night things, but so if you're a YouTube watcher, of course, you might throw a wrench into your schedule because of that. But for the audio listeners, you will still continue to get it as your morning commute first thing in the morning. But let's talk about the loss that the Falcons had. They lost Jeff OKudah. We talked about Jeff OKudah potentially coming back on a 1-year prove-it deal. He signed with the Houston Texans on a 1-year prove-it deal, 1 year, $4.75 million. And I think that's a good bet for the Texans, to get another long press corner opposite Derek Stingley so that they can sort of mix and match, play physical on the outside at the cornerback position while they hope, their pass rush with the additions that, they signed. Who did they sign? Danico Autry on the interior. They already have Will Anderson. They did lose Jonathan Grenard, but we'll see who they wind up drafting. A lot of people are speculating that they'll use their first round pick on another pass rusher as well. So we'll see what happens with that. But it's a good signing for Jeff OKudah. This is what I was kind of hoping that the Falcons would bring Jeff OKudah back on. So we'll see where the Falcons go at the cornerback position as this week and month unfolds and off season unfolds. But one of the things, you take a step back in the secondary potentially. So you want to take steps forward in terms of the front end, in terms of getting the pass rush. And, a lot of people are looking at all the edge rushers that signed on this opening day or technically agreed to terms with their new teams. Maybe we'll get someone reneging like Anthony Barr did a couple of years when I think it was the Jets, and then he wound up going back to Minnesota. So we'll see if any of those guys wind up tearing up these agreed contracts. But you had guys like, Bryce Huff signings at Arius Smith, AJ Epinesa, Jonathan Grenard, Dorrance Armstrong, Danico Autry, Leonard Floyd, Marcus Davenport. All these guys signed contracts. You even got Brian Burns getting traded, the franchise tag for the Carolina Panthers to the New York Giants. But, I don't think, it's obviously not as stacked a group of pass rushers available right now due to all these signings, but it's still a lot of quality options for the Falcons if and when they decide to get involved in upgrading the pass rush. There's guys like Shaq Barrett from the Bucs, Daniil Hunter from the Vikings, Chase Young from the 49ers, Josh Uche from the Patriots, Carl Lawson from the Jets are all available free agents. If the Falcons want to call teams and maybe work out a trade, we've heard rumors and reports that Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa from the Chargers are both available. The Eagles are shopping Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat. Now that the Giants have acquired Brian Burns, will they be willing to shop Azeez Ojulari, another Georgia native, former teammate of Charlie Woerner, and the Falcons could give him a call. He's going into a contract year and say, hey, bring Azeez down here. He's been hurt a lot these last couple of years, and so hasn't necessarily built off of a very productive rookie season that he had a couple of years ago. And so maybe they're willing to shop him or something along those lines. So we'll see how that all plays out. But I think the Falcons still have options in terms of the pass rush. We've been talking about this a couple of times on the podcast, given the lack of depth in the draft at that edge rusher position, where it's basically if you don't take a swing at an edge rusher at pick 8, whether you're going after one of the top guys like Dallas Turner out of Alabama, Laiatu Latu of UCLA, or Jared Verse at Florida State, the quality of edge rushers that you're going to be able to find on day 2 and day 3 of this draft, there's a steep drop off. And so you want to see this team be proactive in free agency, not only because you're going to have better options. You're not only going to get guys that can immediately contribute to the team. Like, these are fully formed pass rushers. So you're more likely to get that 8 sack or 10 sack guy or 12 sack guy right now, as opposed to drafting the guy. Even if you take one of the top guys, it might take the better part of 2 or 3 years for that guy to develop into that player. If he develops into that player at all. So we'll see what the Falcons do at the edge rusher position, but hopefully they'll start to get involved here now that they're sort of big piece of the puzzle, the 2 biggest pieces of the puzzle. Charlie Woerner, of course, being that huge piece that's going to unlock the entirety of the Falcons offense. And Kirk Cousins. Yeah, he's also here in Atlanta. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll see what else unfolds this week. I'm sure as I sit here recording this episode, the Falcons have already made another signing, as they often do during this time. They have no respect for my podcasting schedule. So as we wrap up today's episode, I'm just going to make sure I didn't miss another move by the Falcons. In the meantime, we are good to go. So yes, the Falcons didn't sign anybody else, guys. I really appreciate you tuning in. We'll keep you covered all week long on the latest moves that the Falcons make in free agency. Of course, if you want to catch all the things going on across the entire NFL, Locked On NFL is going to be a great place for you. Locked On Sports Today is going to cover you with the biggest stories, not only from the NFL free agency, but also, the upcoming NCAA tournament as well. And of course, all the college side of the Locked On Podcast Network. I know, we don't often plug it here on the podcast, but those guys will definitely have you covered all March long. If you're looking for those inside scoops, it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every